So just maybe as some introduction here, this is just one vision of how I see a mobile tablet being used in the classroom. Sometime probably in the not too distant future, but more than likely longer than we think. One possible idea would be to use it in the so-called flipped classroom, and this is an fairly old idea, but it's gaining some traction now that mobile computing devices are providing the type of technology needed to really do this correctly. In the flipped classroom idea, if you haven't heard of it, the traditional classroom is, the instructor stands up in front of the class and presents some material. Maybe they do a few problems, and then you're given homework when you go home at night to do on your own. In the flipped classroom idea, you do that sort of switched around. You would watch a lecture or a presentation or some problems being worked, say, on your computer at home through an internet access like that, or your lecture. And then when you got to class in the next day, you would work the problems. And the teacher would say, walk around and help out when and where needed, identifying problems that way. So it turns the nickname they give here, the teacher's role, from the sage on the stage to more of a guide on the side. That's how they have this annotated here in this schematic. So I look at the teacher's role in this as maybe being an education facilitator rather than a lecturer type of thing. So there's been some recent studies, and of course you can find studies that show just about anything, but found this one that talked about some pilot studies where they tried flipping the classroom in a few freshman English class anyway. This one showed great improvement from 50% failed freshman English and 44% failed freshman math. And after they tried this flipping program, they dropped those results down to more closer to 15 or 20%. What makes me a little bit skeptical here are the cases in discipline dropping from 736 down to 249. I'm not sure why that would be, so maybe take it for what it's worth. So how could the iPad be used in the flipped classroom? Well, three main ways. It could be used first to present the videos at home, or since it's a mobile device, more accurately, if you've got children, they're sometimes on the road after school, taking other siblings to ballet classes and music classes and things like that, or going and visiting grandma. They could be getting school done, their lecture part of their school done during that time. Second, when they get to class the next day and they're working their exercises, these exercises wouldn't necessarily need to be pencil and paper type exercises the traditional way. They could be doing interactive things and getting feedback while they do the problems on the iPad. And finally, you could be getting real-time assessments while you're working these problems. If you're going down a path, if this software is smart, it will be able to tell you you're making this error and maybe provide a video hint or provide some animation that would show you what you should be doing. And if that doesn't work, then you've got other issues, and that's what your teacher is for. But it could help out the teachers, I think, in this way, providing some types of assessment and feedback while students are working on things. So first of all, the advantages of looking at videos at home or on the road. And throughout all this, I'm sort of going to be referencing this example of how people in, say, 6th grade now are working on pre-algebra. One of the common ways, and I think Bree told me that last week you talked a little bit about these pan balance problems, this idea of what you do to one side of a pan you need to do to another in pre-algebra in order to keep the two sides equal. So we'll be sort of keeping that example in mind as we go through all this. Right now there's some video recordings out there on the web. I won't really show this one. Some are available on this thing called Khan Academy. Has anybody heard of Khan Academy? A lot of shaking heads. That's good. Sort of an amazing phenomenon, in my opinion. This guy, Salman Khan, was helping out his niece, I think it is, with some math homework or something, and figured out a way that he could work on a tablet and show it to her. And then he thought, as long as I'm doing this, however often the niece needed help, he recorded these help sessions. And the rest, as they say, is history. He's got something like 2,000 to 3,000 of these videos online now, and a company they started, and I think it's being supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and so on. So that thing has really taken off. But those are the kind of things that might be used for some of these videos. But just in a generic sense, the good things about videos are, you can pause them to think, or if you've got distractions, you can view or review them anytime, any place, while you're on the go, if you're on an iPad, or some kind of mobile device. You could have several of them around, optimized for different learning styles, sort of the Howard Gardner's, multiple intelligences things. You might have a set of video lectures that would vary depending on what learning style a student most effectively learns at. These videos could be edited and produced so that they're free of mistakes, hopefully, and no dead air, that kind of thing. You could add graphics and special effects to them. If you're talking about a chemistry class, you could show dangerous or demonstrations that you couldn't because you wouldn't have the resources in every single individual classroom. But a video lecture, you could pull this off. And finally, you can imagine sort of a repository of videos like this that are uniform in content and production, and maybe have some kind of assessment done to them that before they meet approval to get on this repository. And of course, there's bad things involved with this too. One is you'd get very little feedback while you're watching these videos, and virtually no interaction. And the other bad thing is the same as what's a good thing, in that they're uniform in content and production, and that's just not always the case. When you're in a classroom, you want to be able to vary your content based on your particular classroom. So one particular vision might be sort of a Khan Academy on steroids. You could have this, like I said, repository of video lectures, and maybe someone would provide the resources to collect a group of top teachers who are very good, who would excel at designing lectures or presentations like this and curriculum. And then maybe a different set of teachers could come who excel at presenting this material. They may be the same, they may not be the same. And they would actually be the ones recorded and presenting this curriculum that were designed by the other ones. You could incorporate a professional production and editing team and produce these things. And again, they'd be optimized for the different learning styles. And as you go along and you get feedback on these videos, how they're working, how your students are doing in this new, say, iPad curriculum, you would hope that feedback would come from the end of this and come back and say, these videos aren't working. Let's start over on these and maybe make some changes. Or these are working, and what is it about this particular video that's actually working? So then when you get into the classroom, again, you don't need to be using paper and pencil. You could be using the iPad for some interactive classroom exercises. And again, drawing on this pan balance issue, to do the pan balance problem correctly, you can't just sketch out the pan balance and have students, go nuts on it, because some of them may not have ever played around with a pan balance. They don't know what they are. They see this sketch, and maybe they can conceptualize the idea that if you put more weight over here, it's going to sink lower than that, but maybe not if they haven't played with it. So you're relying on the fact that maybe in some years past down the road, when they were 6, 7 years old, they've actually played with manipulatives and a pan balance and experienced this idea. If they haven't, and they may not have because of limited resources, their school may not have had them, maybe they were gone that day, maybe they were distracted that day from something, or maybe they moved from a different school district. Maybe the school district was smart enough to plan that back when they're 6 and 7, 8 years old, they should be doing pan balance manipulatives because they're going to be doing it later. but this child moved in, and I think something like 25% of students have moved into a new school district by the time they're in 6th grade. So that's a very real possibility. Or maybe you're like this kid in the skeleton costume there. It's Halloween and you're hopped up on sugar and you can't deal with your pan balance today. So the students then, say in 6th grade, when they get to doing their pan balance problems, they may show up in an iPad app like this, and they could drag manipulatives around, put them on the pan, and the pan would actually sink, move up and down. The problems could be customized for ones they've had trouble with in the past. So if they get 2 or 3 of them correctly of sort of the simpler variety, they move on. If they're having trouble with those, the software could intelligently say, let's give you a few more of these until you've got this mastered, and then move forward. So this is sort of what the student's view of this kind of problem would look like instead of just a worksheet. They actually would, drag something over, and instead of crossing off one and crossing off 1 dice and crossing off 2 oranges, you could actually drag them out of the pans, and the pans would be out of balance for a while and then regain their balance. So a more visual and an easier transition from when the student was actually using these in school with their tangible manipulatives to the paper and pencil approach. So yeah, the iPad's touch interface gives you kind of a hands-on transition from when you're doing these kind of manipulatives in grade school to when you'll be doing the more abstract work in high school. Yeah, and again, smart software could generate these problems in a logical way, but it could also give you feedback and tell you, this is, maybe you've gone down the wrong approach, and it could give you a hint. Pop it right up there. You wouldn't even need a teacher to come by and say, try this. The software might be able to recognize this, that you've gone down this path, if this were all programmed in there correctly. So then going on to real-time assessments and feedbacks, and this is where the teacher would be involved, or the education facilitator. So maybe a teacher's walking around in their classroom, and this might be the view of the situation they see. Imagine instead of just one face on there, all your students' faces are in icons on there. And as they're going along and the students are working through a problem, those that are working through their fine, show up as green and they're kind of off in the corner. But the software could recognize if certain students are doing the same misconception, and sort of those icons would migrate over to one corner of the iPad and be highlighted in the same color. So for example, then the ones highlighted in red, Jack and Susie and Fred all have misconception number 1. The teacher could just immediately then, while she's walking around or he's walking around, say, Jack and Susie and Fred, come meet me in the back corner here and we'll talk about this. Instead of, it's hit or miss if you're walking around and you're going to recognize this without some kind of immediate feedback like this. The ones in yellow there might be a second misconception, but these maybe the software would have a built-in help tip, and so they could be dimmed out like that, and the software would say these students are experiencing this misconception number 2, but I'm trying to handle it right now. The iPad is trying to handle it through a built-in correction method. So they may be watching another video or watching the icons move around on the screen in the correct way on a sample problem or something. That'll get them thinking along the right lines. But of course, you're not going to catch everything with this. So the child highlighted in blue there, the software might not know what they're doing, and the child in blue might not know what they're doing. So the teacher may be able to click on, tap on that icon and pull up a view of retrace what the child has done. So you can watch this person manipulate objects on the screen, and the teacher say, okay, I see what they're doing, and recognize right away and be able to go over and address that. But the bottom line is, you don't have to be helping everybody at one time, and this would just help focus your attention where it really needs to be. So yeah, with this kind of a thing, also feedback would be generated. As the student is working, statistics could be being kept, assessments being done and recorded. You can imagine even somewhere down the line, as you master certain concepts, the iPad would be recording this in a database, and your personal knowledge map, this thing that's laid out, something is filled in one by one as you master these things. And some part of that should scare you a little bit. But
maybe getting to this later. The things you've shown so far, it seems like that I'm not seeing the advantage of the portability.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I'm thinking if I, as a teacher, if I were in a class, I'd like students at a nice big monitor to see these things that they could manipulate. With these activities, is the portability particularly useful?
Not yet. So it is in fact, if you think about the videos at the beginning, when they're at home working on the videos,
yeah.
One would hope they're watching the videos in that part of the portability, but you don't need to stop there. You can also do some of these sample problems, and I would suggest doing that right away after you've watched, say, the lecture videos. It might give you 2 or 3 of the simpler sample of problems, and then say, you're going to come back, and tomorrow in class we're going to do even more of these, and they're going to get a little more difficult. So in that part of it, you would need that with you while you're watching the video.
The vision is every kid has their own.
Yes.
That they're taking with, so
yes.
It's theirs at home, it's theirs at school.
Exactly.
It's theirs from class to class.
It comes in their backpack with them in the morning and leaves and stays with them all day. And presumably, like this idea of a personal knowledge map, the database that's associated with that would somehow stay with them even for life. You could say, this is as you go from grade to grade, this is my knowledge map, this is how it's filled in, and then when you come to a new section, it would look back on that and see what prerequisites for this you've had and what you haven't, what you need to fill in before you should go on, that kind of thing.
And when they come to a classroom, they would give to teachers, or the teachers might have, access to their iPads so that they could know who's who.
That's right.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And what they're doing.
Right. So there's there's this back-end complicated database that's going on that's keeping records, and I know there's huge issues about privacy in that, but
But some of those technologies I've seen in action with laptop computers and like Land School, the program that does this with where you can monitor all of the students' computers, see their screen. TI calculators have that. But all of that's kind of, it's not an individual's personal property that we're working on.
Right.
That's what's different about the issue.
And there are a lot of things that would stop something like this from being implemented, not the least of which is everybody having their own personal mobile device like that, that they carry around with them. You want, Bree?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know, from my perspective, what is the biggest benefit to using the iPad is that, if you watch kids and you have a laptop and an iPad in close vicinity, pretty much 100% of the time they're going to go to the iPad. It's just so really easy to interact with, and it's not like a thing that you only would associate with doing schoolwork. You can also associate it with fun and games, and like you have a connection to it that persists beyond just school. And so having this kind of positive interaction in addition to the quick access to learning and doing your homework or all of those things, I think, makes it really valuable in terms of an educational device.
Do you think they go to an iPad over a phone?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Is there something about that little tablet that's just sort of just the right size?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And with the iPad Mini, like you could question whether the tablet size is actually of value, or if you can fit all of those manipulatives on a tinier screen. I don't know.
And it's not only fit. I heard some people complaining that the possibility that little fingers have trouble with fine motor skills, and that iPad mini may not work out so well for smaller. It's easier for them to carry and move around with, but to actually get in there and do what they need to do may be a little trickier than advertised. So, yeah. So, no, that's great. Yeah, so that was pretty much it. I'd love to discuss this more, and what I could also go on and do an iOS demo, or yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess I'm sort of interested in how the implementation works, because are the students required to buy the tablet themselves, or is it provided? Because there's a big problem with financial ability there.
And every part of this, they're a big problem.
Yeah, there's a lot to argue with this. My mom actually works for a school up north, and they've implemented tablets for the 6th grade age group, and there's a lot of, well, it's provided for the student, they don't have to pay for it. But I guess it's a large cost because a lot of the tablets are broken. Even when used correctly, there's just a lot of moving it around. I mean, it's not used exclusively in the classroom. They use a lot of, there's also a lot of normal school work, and so I think it's the transition when they're taking it out of the desk or putting it away. But I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, definitely. My personal opinion on this, I think, is that, you know, if the vision is there, then the money will eventually come. People will put resources toward it. But, you know, everybody needs to agree on a common vision for this, and that it's actually useful. I'm not convinced at all that giving everyone an iPad right now is the way to go. But you know, if you certainly could be convinced, and with the iPad or other mobile devices, I see that as being more and more compelling, I guess. So, yeah.
Sort of, I guess, a little bit related then. The thing that I've been thinking, and it might be sort of a question of implementation, is whether a cloud-based application would be more appropriate, just because it wouldn't necessarily require a uniform device, and it wouldn't even necessarily need to be a mobile device, I guess. But of course, the flip side of that is you're working with less integrated technology, so it's not going to be able to talk to like everything inside the iPad if you're doing it in like HTML or something.
But you would also, the other tricky thing is you'd need an internet connection everywhere, and ubiquitous internet connection, right? If the student is going to be able to do this wherever and whenever they want. The reason I like that is just that it's sort of a life lesson, right? I mean, if we want people to be lifelong learners and to be open to the idea of learning wherever and whenever they are, why not start that in school? So.
Do you have any thoughts about the training required for teachers who are implementing this sort of classroom? Because I feel like it's possible that the teachers are just like, oh, here's iPads, you know, I mean, I feel like that happens sometimes. And, you know, in order for, so, you know, I guess in order for teachers to, you know, adapt to technology, and also since the teacher's role has changed, you know, understandably, do you have any opinion on what, you know, and I guess this kind of goes back into implementation also, like what education the teachers would need to be given in order to make this effective?
A lot, I think, and as much of that as reassurances, I think the idea of a flipped school, if I were a teacher, I'd be threatened by it somewhat, would be my first reaction, I think, that this is taking something I was trained for, specifically for, and putting in the hands of someone else. So it, you know, it first and foremost would have to be embraced, I think, by the education community, and embraced in a sufficient fashion that they would decide to reorganize the training to be more of these education facilitators, someone who were specialized in recognizing misconceptions as they went around the classroom, and classroom management, learned about, you know, how to pull out these students who were having these misconceptions and utilizing the technology in that way. But there are giant hurdles in this, and that's definitely a big one. Go ahead.
Do you know if publishers are now leaning towards publishing their textbooks on in software that could be put on these Or are they figuring out how to get the cash out of that kind of use?
They definitely are. There's a lot of progress going on right now in that very specific avenue. All the three main education publishers are embracing the iPad technology and putting almost, I heard that, what did we just hear recently? Do you remember the statistic from the last? Some shockingly amount of the curriculum that's used by a large fraction of the schools in the United States is already online in some form or another in these books. And what they're trying to do is make them more interactive. So it's not just that you can read the books like you can with the paper versions of them, but they're trying to add in their animations as you go through, touch, what they call them, sorry? Yeah, some interactive like modules inside there that they do, and it's, if you look at them, I think they're a little disappointing right now. But the rate at which that's being implemented, I think that will just go through the roof in 2 or 3 years. These books.
Publishers will sell the digital version rather than a paper version.
Yeah. I most certainly do. In fact, I think the current administration, I heard, is a big proponent of going from the paperback books and sort of a national goal to going towards digital books. So yeah, I definitely think there's a push in that direction, for better or worse. Go ahead.
How close are we to sort of reaching this vision of having the tablet or just having the programs or the software as a classroom manager and real-time assessor?
I don't know. I haven't heard anyone talking about it used in this way. I mean, if you go to the App Store now and you look at the iPad apps that are related to education, they're the kind of things you've seen on computers in the past, which is fine and it's great. But it's not this kind of integrated idea where classroom management and teachers are involved. And the big thing, I think, is getting feedback between all the different components of this. If you could get that working, I think it would be really something special, but it would require a commitment, I think, from large groups of people, both business probably and government, or maybe at least to get some pilot programs going to demonstrate how this type of thing would work. So I haven't heard of anybody trying anything like that, though.
I believe there are apps that exist though that do allow some type of classroom networking between the iPads. Yeah, I believe that's true, but I'm not sure it's true that a teacher could send screens to the students. Do you know if that does exist?
I haven't seen anything like that, no, but that would be...
Anybody seen that?
Not for we know it exists for computers and graphic calculators, but not for that I see.
There's one called Nearpod that's look more.
The technology is certainly there. There is no reason that I can think of, besides that somebody hasn't done it yet, that it couldn't be done right now. All this, I think, could be done right now.
And you've talked about the ways in which a teacher can kind of better do the kind of monitoring and facilitating the learning that their students have. Do you see changes in learning? The flipped model is a change in learning, but how do students change? How does the learning process for students change in this? You know, of course they have interactive. So, for example, balance activity is, I think, an interesting one because you do something hands-on, you do something with the computer. Is there a point at which students are making their own balances? Or creating their own balances?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And I think one of the major benefits is this idea of immediate feedback. That the software could tell you right away, instead of if you do this worksheet and you turn it in, it could be 3 days or it could be over a weekend before you get it graded back. And then if you care enough, you're going to look at it and say, you know, okay, something's really wrong here. And then if you're even triply lucky, you'll get some teacher to intervene and help you out with this. But if right away, as you're working that problem, you are given feedback and saying, no, stop right there. Don't do 20 of them all wrong because something's wrong here. And some kind of intervention is done right away. I can't imagine that's just not super more beneficial than the way it's currently done.
You could, because in the 70s, there were a learning machine for simple tasks that did just that, and we were not that happy with it.
What did they do?
Yeah, we have that here in the University of Illinois with Plato.
Yeah,
Basement of Altgeld.
send you exercises for addition, for example, and then checked where your problems were, give feedback, give the similar or different exercise according to your actions. So where is the difference here?
So the folks were not happy with that. And did it when folks were getting problems wrong? I understand that it may have gone back and intelligently gave you new problems, but did it intervene with instruction at that point on why you were getting this wrong? And
It did.
It did.
It did.
To a certain amount, but not. It's not a teacher, but.
Sure.
I actually have an amusing story that was told to me by one of the mathematicians who was working on that project. He told me that he liked it okay, but the only students that he had, he was using this in the university level, and the only students he had who he really thought ever actually learned anything from that system were the students who hacked the system so that they always got the answer right. And I think that there was actually a little bit of a lesson there, that there's a element of education that's predicated on the assumption that whenever we're learning in school, we're learning as people and from people. And tools are great, but replacing the emotional element and the creative element is a tricky proposition that has to be done very, very gently and carefully. And expectations can be changed, and tools like this can work great, but if it becomes mechanical, then thinking becomes mechanical, and you start losing kids who try to break stuff.
Would it be the motto, the lesson learned is that if you build it or can rebuild it, then you've learned it.
And I think it also begs the question, is there any time in anyone's imagination that you can imagine a machine giving that kind of emotional, all the types of things you said were missing from it? Is there any time, technology has changed quite a bit, if that slope keeps going, when, if ever, will we reach the point that a machine can replicate those, in fact, feelings or emotional ties that are
Think of it as a bonus question to the Turing test.
Yes, exactly.
People are working on it. I don't know to what degree we will manage to get it. But one thing that in your model I didn't hear is where is the students' initiative, questions of the students. I didn't see the place for students' questions, more student initiative. I saw covering things that you have said to cover. I don't see the student responsibility and curiosity and work.
Yep, that's true. That's true. This would not have a lot of that as it's set out now. I mean, you could always build in places for feedback, right? A button up in the corner where you could contact somebody or call your teacher over if you wanted to expand on what was going on now. But I mean, I don't know that it's not flexible enough, I think, yet, technology to totally allow free exploration of ideas. It's just not. Yeah.
I feel like this whole question of the, I guess, interacting with other people side of learning is kind of I don't want to say overrated, but I'm not sure that it's completely necessary, because I recently took a course on iTunes U, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically they just videotape professors at universities giving their lecture to their class, and they make them available for free for people to download and watch on their computer. And I have to say, the guy who was teaching that class is one of the best teachers I've ever had in a college class, and I never interacted with him at all. I did exercises on my own, and I had, this was a class to learn programming, and I had access to people who knew things about programming, so I had this kind of guide on the side I could go to and say, okay, here's my questions, this is my curiosity, answer my question. And then I go back to my own programming and back to the video, and there was really nothing lacking from that experience, I don't think. I mean, you can say like the emotional connection between the student and the teacher is very important, but I mean, we have like, you're not technically interacting with them, but you can see them, you can see their face, you can see their emotions. And the reality is, in a classroom, when a teacher is speaking at you, they don't really see your emotions. You watch them, they're talking on stage, and it's really not that different if they don't see you as well. Does that make any sense? So in a classroom, when a teacher is speaking at the front of the room, they are not really going to see each individual student's face as much as each student is seeing them. So that's why a video is not as different as it would seem from a learning perspective.
There's one-way interaction, and when you're in the classroom on the following day, you would have that interaction where you can see this blank stare when you're talking to someone about something, or recognize these telltale clues as to when somebody is with you or not. But yeah, that is right. That's a fundamental issue with technology.
The goal is not at all to eliminate the role of the teacher in the slightest. I think it would be more enabling to the teacher than like trying to get rid of the teacher, because the teacher is now able to spend the entire class time dealing with the students' curiosities if that's necessary, whereas before they had to go through the content and then spend the last 5 minutes at the end dealing with the curiosity of the students. So I think it would be more time spent on curiosity in the long run.
That actually sort of raises a question in my head, which is, how much does the current homework model teach people or teach students to be self-learners instead of depending on interaction? Because I know at some point in life you're going to have to be able to teach yourself. I have no idea where that fits in. I don't know.
If you're not already a self-learner, it's pretty clear that it doesn't.
Is self-teaching, is that sort of a derivative of being in a social environment where you're able to learn with people and you take things from that? You're asking how does somebody become self-motivated in learning? Right.
As opposed to like the fact that everybody is. Well, we all learned our language, right, without having necessarily the direct instruction beyond our parents and our initiative to learn it to communicate effectively. But trying to figure out how people become self-motivated through school and play and be good at school. Homework, I think, is one of the key separators that we've had historically. Who does their homework? The ones who, are self-motivated to move on. It sorts them out. Homework's one of the mechanisms by which we've done it, in my opinion. Sorted out self-motivated people. Or at least as far as school goes, as it's currently structured. Restructuring it to have a more social interaction, or making homework, watching in the flip, so you're watching a video, and instead of doing the homework, the thinking at home, you're doing the thinking with your colleagues in a classroom. it'll be a different dynamic, is a different dynamic for those teachers who are doing it, I think.
I think it's also, it ends up being something where if you are already kind of, I mean, I feel like there's people on both sides of like, homework is good, homework is bad. And I mean, I feel like if you're already on like the, I don't prefer homework side, then you might embrace this more. For example, one issue I was just hearing about, I don't know if it was what research was done to back it up. I think there's something done. The question is, do lower SES students, if lower SES students who may not see parents work home with them, they may not have that same reinforcement that if you have a higher SES student or a higher SES parent who does bring work home with them, and they get that reinforcement, then they might be more inclined to do the homework or want to complete it. And that, so I mean, in that case, that's just one reason that you might dislike homework. But if you personally believe in those specific reasons, then you might be more inclined to say, oh well, I didn't like homework anyways, let's try this flipped classroom idea.
I think not necessarily a response to that, but just an add-on. In the flipped classroom, you have a much lower need for homework. Like a student can still learn and physically do the activity without doing the homework at home. You will still get the hands-on experience and the doing problems experience and all of that, even if you are not motivated to do any kind of work outside of school. Which I think is really valuable, because now what's going on is if a student doesn't do their homework, they never practice the skills that they're learning in their class. And so they might watch a teacher do a problem 1,000 times, but without doing it themselves, it's really hard for them to learn anything. So I think with regard to that issue, that a student might not do their homework, this is a better solution than the current homework model.
It sort of comes down to what do you value most? Is it the lecture part or the working problems part? I don't know.
Thank you.
Are we past? Oh, well, thank you all.